It was an ordinary afternoon in the quiet suburb of Maple Grove when something unusual happened that left everyone talking. A golden retriever, with fur matted from running and eyes wide with desperation, sprinted down the sidewalk toward the police station. Officers inside, used to handling routine traffic violations and minor disputes, weren't prepared for what they saw next. The dog stopped at the station's glass doors, barking loudly and scratching at the entrance as if it were begging for someone to listen. At first, Officer Ramirez thought it was just a stray looking for food or shelter. But as he opened the door, the dog darted back toward the street, pausing briefly to turn around and bark again, as if saying, "Follow me." Intrigued, Ramirez grabbed his jacket and decided to see what this determined canine was trying to show them. A few officers joined him, sensing that this was more than just a dog seeking attention. The retriever led them down Main Street, its pace quickening with every step. People stopped and stared, curious about the unlikely scene, a group of uniformed officers chasing after a dog that seemed to have a purpose. By the time they reached the corner of Elm and Riverside, the atmosphere shifted. The dog abruptly stopped, barking toward a parked car. That's when Officer Ramirez noticed it, a faint, muffled noise coming from inside the vehicle. The officers approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The windows were slightly fogged, and the car seemed abandoned. The dog's barking grew more frantic, circling the vehicle as if urging them to act quickly. Ramirez motioned for the others to spread out, and as they peered inside, their expressions turned serious. Whatever was happening here wasn't normal. Within minutes, backup was called, and the area was cordoned off. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering and speculating about why an entire block was suddenly swarmed with flashing lights and patrol cars. The dog sat at the edge of the scene, its tail wagging nervously, as though it knew its job wasn't done yet. But what had the officers found in the car? And why had the dog come to them for help in the first place? The answers would shock everyone and turn this quiet town into the center of an unforgettable story. As the officers encircled the seemingly abandoned car, the golden retriever's anxious pacing intensified. Officer Ramirez cautiously approached the vehicle, peering through the fogged windows. Inside, he discerned a child's car seat, its straps unfastened, and scattered toys on the back seat. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. The muffled sounds they had heard earlier now seemed more urgent, a faint cry for help. The dog barked insistently, drawing Ramirez's attention to the trunk. He signaled for his fellow officers to join him. With a nod of agreement, they decided to open the trunk, unsure of what they might find. As the latch clicked and the trunk slowly lifted, the officers were met with a sight that made their hearts race. Inside the trunk lay a young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear but also relief at the sight of the officers. She appeared unharmed but was visibly shaken. The golden retriever immediately jumped up, trying to reach her, whimpering softly. It became clear that this loyal dog had led the police to its owner's location, saving her from an uncertain fate. The officers quickly freed the woman, who clung to her canine companion, tears streaming down her face. She managed to whisper her gratitude, her voice trembling. As paramedics arrived to attend to her, Officer Ramirez couldn't help but marvel at the extraordinary bond between the woman and her dog. This brave animal had not only sensed its owner's distress but had taken decisive action to seek help, leading the police directly to her. News of the heroic dog spread quickly through the town, capturing the hearts of many. The local news featured the story, highlighting the incredible instincts and loyalty of the golden retriever. Animal behaviorists explain that dogs have an acute sense of their owner's emotions and can often detect when something is wrong, prompting them to act in ways that seem almost human. In the days that followed, the woman and her dog became local heroes, receiving an outpouring of support from the community. The police department honored the golden retriever with a special award for bravery, acknowledging the crucial role it played in rescuing its owner. This incident served as a powerful reminder of the deep connection between humans and their pets, and how, in moments of crisis, that bond can lead to extraordinary acts of courage and loyalty. As the officers pieced together the scene, the woman, still trembling, managed to recount fragmented details of what had happened. She explained how she had been approached in a parking lot by a stranger while loading groceries into her car. At first, he seemed like any other passerby, but something about his demeanor felt off. Before she could react, everything went dark. She awoke to find herself tied up in her own car, with her loyal dog barking frantically in the back seat. The dog, sensing danger, had lunged at the man, biting and clawing until he abandoned the vehicle. Somehow, the golden retriever had managed to free itself and, instead of fleeing, made the decision to find help. It was a story almost too incredible to believe, but the dog's actions had saved her life. As she spoke, tears rolled down her cheeks, and her hand never left the dog's head. Meanwhile, Officer Ramirez couldn't shake the details of her account. The parking lot where the abduction occurred was a busy area, lined with security cameras. The officers quickly coordinated to obtain footage, hoping to get a clearer picture of the suspect. The video revealed a man wearing a hooded jacket, carefully watching the woman before making his move. He worked with precision, as though this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. Ramirez's stomach churned. They could be dealing with someone far more dangerous than they initially thought. At the same time, neighbors from the blocked-off street began to gather, curious about the commotion. Rumors spread quickly, some true, others exaggerated. A few residents claimed they'd seen a suspicious man lingering in the area over the past week. Others noted that their cars had been tampered with recently, but they hadn't thought much of it. Now, every small incident seemed connected. The golden retriever, now calmer but still alert, kept glancing toward the far end of the street. Ramirez noticed and decided to investigate further, trusting the dog's instincts once again. Following the animal, he approached a run-down shed hidden behind an overgrown yard. The dog barked sharply, pacing near the entrance. Ramirez called for backup, his pulse quickening as he imagined what might be inside. When officers entered the shed, they found evidence that chilled them to the core. Scattered around were ropes, duct tape, and what looked like hastily discarded gloves. There were also photos of several women, including the woman they had just rescued. It was clear this wasn't a random crime. The suspect had been watching her for weeks, maybe longer. The discovery deepened the mystery. Why had this man targeted her? And more importantly, was she the only one? The woman's account suggested she might not have been his first victim, and the items in the shed hinted at a calculated pattern. The realization left the officers with more questions than answers. As night fell, the atmosphere in the neighborhood grew tense. Patrol cars remained stationed on the street, and investigators worked tirelessly to gather evidence from the shed and the car. The golden retriever stayed close to its owner, its watchful eyes scanning every shadow. But one thing lingered in Ramirez's mind: the suspect hadn't been caught. If he had managed to escape once, there was no telling when, or where, he might strike again. As the investigation deepened, the officers worked through the night, piecing together the unsettling clues left behind. The shed had become a focal point of the case, a place that hinted at the suspect's dark intentions. Among the evidence collected, one item stood out: a crumpled receipt with a timestamp from earlier that day. It was from a gas station just a few miles away. Ramirez knew they might have caught a lucky break. If the suspect had been there recently, the security cameras might hold the key to tracking him down. Meanwhile, the golden retriever remained restless. It stayed close to its owner but often paced near the windows, growling softly at the darkness outside. The woman, though surrounded by officers and neighbors, couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. Her hands trembled as she recounted every small detail she could remember, desperate to help the officers find the man who had done this. At the station, the gas station footage revealed a chilling detail: the suspect had been driving a white van with no license plates. The timestamp confirmed he had stopped just hours before abducting the woman. Ramirez immediately issued an alert to surrounding towns, hoping to intercept the vehicle before it disappeared again. But the suspect seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving behind only fear and unanswered questions. Back on the street, tensions continued to rise. The neighborhood, once quiet and safe, now felt like a place where danger lurked in every shadow. Officers patrolled tirelessly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they checked every alley and driveway. Despite their efforts, the golden retriever's unease grew. It paced relentlessly, its sharp eyes scanning every movement. Then, just past midnight, a call came through. A patrol officer stationed near the edge of town had spotted a white van matching the description. It was parked behind an old warehouse, its engine still warm. Ramirez and a team of officers rushed to the location, hearts pounding as they prepared for what they might find. The warehouse loomed ominously in the moonlight, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. The officers moved silently, their flashlights casting long shadows as they approached. The van was empty, its doors unlocked. Inside, they found more disturbing evidence, a map with locations circled in red, including the neighborhood where the woman lived. A notebook lay open on the passenger seat, its pages filled with cryptic notes and dates. Suddenly, a sound echoed from inside the warehouse, a faint shuffle, followed by the creak of floorboards. The team froze, weapons drawn, as they signaled for backup. Ramirez's heart raced as he inched closer to the entrance, every instinct telling him they were walking into something dangerous. The golden retriever, sensing the tension, let out a low growl as it remained by the woman's side back at the scene. The dog's unwavering vigilance was a stark reminder that this wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the man who had caused all this chaos was still a threat, and every second that passed felt like borrowed time. Inside the warehouse, the officers moved methodically, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The sounds grew louder, a series of hurried footsteps, then silence. Ramirez signaled to his team, and they fanned out, searching every corner. The tension was unbearable, every creak of the floor and every rustle in the shadows amplifying the weight of the moment. As Ramirez turned a corner, his flashlight caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a figure darting through the darkness. He called out, his voice steady but firm, ordering the suspect to stop. But instead of surrendering, the figure bolted, disappearing deeper into the labyrinth of the warehouse. The chase was on, and the stakes had never been higher. Ramirez and his team pursued the figure through the dimly lit warehouse, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the metal walls. Every turn seemed to lead to another shadowy corridor, the suspect staying just out of reach. Ramirez's pulse pounded in his ears as he rounded a corner, his flashlight catching the edge of a jacket disappearing through a side door. He motioned for two officers to follow him while the others secured the exits. As they pushed through the door, the team found themselves in a narrow alley behind the warehouse. The suspect was nowhere to be seen. Ramirez scanned the area, frustrated and alert, when his radio crackled to life. An officer stationed back at the woman's house reported something alarming. The golden retriever had suddenly started barking frantically, pawing at the door as though trying to get outside. It wasn't just the dog's behavior that was unsettling, one of the officers noticed a faint sound of movement coming from the backyard. The realization hit Ramirez like a freight train. If the suspect wasn't in the warehouse anymore, where was he? And why was the dog acting so distressed? Ramirez barked orders into his radio, instructing the team to double back to the house immediately. The suspect might have been more calculating than they thought, using the warehouse as a decoy to draw the officers away. Meanwhile, back at the house, the woman clutched her phone, her fear mounting as the dog's growls grew louder. The officer stationed outside had swept the area earlier but found nothing unusual. Now, with the retriever's behavior escalating, the atmosphere felt heavy with tension. The officer approached the backyard cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He called out, but there was no response. Then, he saw it, movement near the fence line. A figure crouched low, trying to stay hidden. The officer shouted for the person to stop, but the figure bolted, vaulting over the fence and disappearing into the night. The golden retriever barked furiously, straining against the leash held by the woman inside. When Ramirez and his team arrived moments later, the tension was palpable. The woman, still shaken, described what she'd heard, soft footsteps near the windows and a faint rustling in the backyard. Ramirez's stomach twisted. The suspect had been closer than they realized, possibly planning to strike again. As the team scoured the area, Ramirez couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Why would the suspect return to the house, knowing it was surrounded by officers? What was he looking for? That's when another officer discovered something chilling. Tucked beneath a pile of leaves near the fence was a hidden camera. It was small and well concealed, aimed directly at the house. The discovery raised the stakes even higher. This wasn't just a random attack, it was calculated, deliberate. The camera suggested the suspect had been watching the woman for longer than they initially thought. Was she the only target? Or was this part of a larger pattern? As Ramirez processed the new information, the golden retriever let out a low growl, its body tense as it stared into the darkness. Ramirez followed the dog's gaze, his hand instinctively moving to his flashlight. Something wasn't adding up. The suspect had outmaneuvered them twice now, staying one step ahead. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, but Ramirez was determined to end it before anyone else got hurt. In the distance, a faint noise broke through the silence, the sound of tires on gravel. Ramirez turned toward the street, his flashlight catching the glint of a vehicle slowly creeping away from the scene. The white van. This time, Ramirez wasn't letting it get away. Ramirez jumped into his car, radioing for backup as he sped after the van. The vehicle swerved recklessly through the quiet streets, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Ramirez's grip tightened on the wheel, adrenaline surging as he closed the distance. The van veered into an abandoned industrial area, its tires skidding on the gravel before coming to an abrupt stop. Ramirez stopped a safe distance away, his heart pounding as he radioed his position. He stepped out cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the still night. The van's engine was still running, but the driver's seat was empty. Ramirez approached slowly, his weapon drawn. He could hear his backup arriving in the distance, their sirens growing louder. As he peered into the van, his breath caught. Inside were more photographs of the woman and a list of addresses, each one carefully marked with dates. It was clear she wasn't the only target. A rustling sound behind him snapped Ramirez out of his thoughts. He turned quickly, his flashlight catching the shadow of a figure darting into the nearby factory. He signaled the arriving officers and led the charge into the building. The factory was massive, its hallways echoing every step as they pursued the suspect. The tension was suffocating, every turn revealing only more shadows. Finally, they cornered him in an old storage room. The man stood with his hands raised, a smug grin on his face that made Ramirez's blood boil. He offered no resistance as the officers cuffed him, but something about his demeanor felt off. Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling that this was too easy, that something was still missing. As the team searched the factory, they uncovered a room that sent chills down their spines. It was set up like a command center, with multiple monitors displaying live feeds from hidden cameras. One of the screens showed the woman's house, the view unmistakably from the backyard. Another screen displayed a different address, one Ramirez didn't recognize. The suspect had been watching multiple locations, and the extent of his operation was far more intricate than they had imagined. Just as Ramirez thought they'd contained the situation, his radio crackled with a frantic message. Officers stationed at the woman's house reported movement in the backyard again. Confusion rippled through the team. How could that be possible if the suspect was in custody? Ramirez's stomach sank as he realized the horrifying truth. The man they had captured wasn't working alone. Back at the house, the golden retriever was barking furiously, its body pressed against the back door. The woman clutched her phone, her fear renewed as she peeked out the window. A figure emerged from the shadows, but before she could scream, the dog lunged through the partially open door. The officers stationed nearby rushed in just in time, tackling the second man to the ground. The final twist left everyone shaken. The suspect in custody had been working with a partner, someone just as calculating and dangerous. Together, they had orchestrated a plan to terrorize multiple victims, using the cameras to track their every move. But thanks to the dog's bravery and the quick action of law enforcement, their operation was finally dismantled. As the sun rose, the neighborhood began to breathe a little easier. The woman hugged her dog tightly, tears streaming down her face as she thanked Ramirez and his team. Despite everything, she felt safe for the first time in days, knowing her loyal companion and the officers had gone to such lengths to protect her. But as Ramirez reviewed the evidence later, one thing stood out. Among the items recovered from the factory was a handwritten note with a single chilling line, "This isn't over." The message hung in the air like a dark cloud, a reminder that even with the arrests, the story might not be fully over. For now, though, peace had returned, and the dog who had begged for help proved to be the hero of a story no one would ever forget. As the investigation wound down, the full scale of the suspect's plans began to emerge. Ramirez and his team uncovered more hidden cameras, notebooks, and maps that painted a disturbing picture of their operation. The two men had targeted individuals in several neighborhoods, observing their routines and looking for opportunities to strike. While their ultimate motives remained unclear, the evidence collected ensured they would face justice for their actions. The woman who had been at the center of the chaos spent the next few days surrounded by friends and neighbors, who rallied around her with support. The golden retriever, now a local hero, never left her side. Its unwavering loyalty and sharp instincts had been the key to uncovering the threat, and the woman couldn't imagine how things might have ended without it. She decided to give the dog an official name, Hope, because, in her darkest moments, it had brought her exactly that. Ramirez visited the woman one last time to check on her and share some final updates. The men were in custody, awaiting trial, and their operation had been effectively dismantled. There was no evidence to suggest any other accomplices, but Ramirez assured her that extra patrols would remain in the area for a while. The woman expressed her gratitude, her voice trembling as she spoke about how much it meant to have someone believe her and take action. For Ramirez, the case was one he wouldn't soon forget. It wasn't just the complexity of the suspects' plans or the fear they had caused, it was the small moments of bravery that stood out. From the golden retriever's instinctive response to the woman's courage in recounting every detail, it was clear that the case had been solved not just through police work but through the resilience of ordinary individuals. The story of Hope spread quickly through the community, and soon, even local news stations picked it up. Reporters visited the woman's home, sharing the tale of how her loyal companion had saved her life and helped uncover a dangerous plot. People from all over sent letters and messages, praising the dog and offering their support. Someone even started a fundraiser to provide Hope with a lifetime supply of treats and toys, a gesture that brought a rare smile to the woman's face. Though life slowly began returning to normal, the experience left a lasting mark on everyone involved. Ramirez carried the case as a reminder of why he had joined the force in the first place, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves and to stand up against the unseen dangers that sometimes hid in plain sight. The woman, too, found herself changed. While the fear lingered, she also felt a newfound strength. She began working with a local group that provided resources and support for people who had experienced similar situations, hoping to turn her ordeal into something positive. Hope became a symbol for the group, attending events and bringing comfort to those in need. As for the neighborhood, the ordeal brought people closer. Neighbors who had once been strangers now looked out for one another, forming a tighter-knit community. The events served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and the power of collective support. Months later, Ramirez received a handwritten thank you note from the woman, along with a photo of Hope lounging in the backyard, surrounded by toys and looking as happy as ever. The note simply read, "Thank you for giving me my life back. Hope and I will never forget what you did for us." Ramirez placed the note in his desk drawer, a quiet reminder that even in the face of darkness, light could prevail. For the woman, her golden retriever, and the officers who had worked tirelessly to protect them, the story was over. But its impact would be felt for years to come, a tale of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her dog.